Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Be to Lead conversation. Today, I am so thrilled to have here another amazing woman, Azure Montoute-Lewis. Azure is Global Head of Management and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Hill Knowlton Strategies in beautiful New York City. Azure, welcome. It is such a pleasure and an honor to have you here today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad we were able to connect to do this. So this is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. And eventually we did make it to connect. It was an
Yes, we
adventure.
did. After many adventures, yes.
But now there is a gift for us, right? Because we are getting your story and you are learning about your leadership and success story. So we
Oh,
are thrilled about it.
thank
And before we start, Azure,
you. Yeah.
why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes,
And who is
absolutely.
Azure?
Oh, so many things to so many people. I'm very lucky. I've lived a very blessed life. I'm very lucky. I am a born and raised New Yorker. I'm a Brooklyn girl. I grew up in Brooklyn, and I am a wife to my fabulous husband. I am a mom to my 7-year-old son. I am a leader in my organization. My career has led me through a couple of different iterations. I like to think I'm on my third career now, and
Wow.
it's been an amazing ride. I think I've always pursued my passion, and so I think that that is part of who I am. You can see behind me the things that matter most to me. Clearly, is a map of Brooklyn. There is also a couple pictures of my sorority, which is a very big part of
Wow.
my life. And also, I'm a scholar. I just graduated with a second master's in organizational development. Um,
Congratulations.
thank you. And so this actually painting behind me is an outline of all the things of how I see myself. So I'm a daughter, a scholar, a woman, a wife, a leader, and a mom.
Oh,
One of my favorite
wonderful.
jobs.
Wonderful. So, welcome to Azure.
So, thank you.
All of these. And Azure, if you look back from where you stand right now, would
Mhm.
you say that you have always wanted to become the person that you are today, or the person you are today happened to become the way you are today? Was it a choice?
Oh my
Was it
goodness.
life?
That's a great question. It's interesting. I think always from a young age, I thought that I would be someone who was making an impact, right? So I think about even as a child, as I thought about the different career choices I've made, the degrees I've gone after, the jobs I've taken. I think I always wanted to have impact and influence. And so I think so many of the decisions that I've made up to now have been driving towards that purpose, right? Driving
Mm,
towards wanting to be someone that had made an impact, that was able to make a difference, that really changed the course of lives for people, right? I think that no
mm,
matter what I was
mm,
going to do, that was going to be something that was central to who I was. I think
mm.
every decision I've made post that kind of realization about myself, I think has driven towards that.
That's beautiful. And this is a very powerful realization because, as you said, then you can do whatever, right? Once you are looking to fulfill that purpose.
Mhm.
And I am sure that even following that lead, that purpose, there have been sliding doors moment in your career, right? Where you could have chosen differently, but instead made the choice you did, and that took you there. Can
Yeah.
you share with us few of these sliding doors moment and what would have happened if, well, you don't know what would happen, right? But why you chose the way you did?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. There has been so many, I think, pivotal points that I've made decisions. And I think because I've always followed my intuition and my gut, I have no regrets. I don't think I could have made any better decisions that I made. And there's a level of peace and comfort that comes with that, right? It comes with knowing as
Mm,
you look back at these pivotal moments that nope, I made the right decision. I did the right thing. I ended up where I was supposed to go. It's interesting. Like I think even early on, when I think about all the educational decisions I made. So when I think about going to high school. I had an opportunity to go to a specialized high school here in New York that focused on STEM, really focused on science, math, and engineering. And that decision versus doing that versus going to another high school that was much closer to home, but didn't have that same STEM focus, like that was a pivotal decision because that is what led to me going to college to study astronomy and astrophysics, right? Because
Wow.
that was my first career. I was a scientist. I'm a scientist at heart. And that put me on that path. And then when I think about what I was going to do after undergrad, I had an internship where I was working for JP Morgan from my senior year in high school to my senior year in college. But I also at the time, Troy was potentially going to law school, right? But I made the decision that I wanted to go to work. I wanted to go into business. I didn't want to continue on school. I wanted to have a different experience. And that set me on the trajectory to focus on marketing, which led to me getting an MBA. And so
Mm.
thinking about business school, like I think about so many things, like every 4 years I had a pivotal decision. And so I had an opportunity. I had three different very strong Ivy League top 10 universities that I could have gone to business school at the time. And I chose to go to Stern because something about it felt like it aligned to me, aligned to my purpose. And then also, I went on a fellowship. I went on a full tuition fellowship, right? And it was because
Mm.
I made that decision versus going to one of the other two Ivy League opportunities that I had. I was able to buy a home. I was able to
Mm.
save a lot more money. I didn't come out of school with any debt. I never had any student loans or student debt, which I think has
Amazing.
helped me, as I've gone. But I think even more past that point, I think even the jobs I've taken, like I think I was always very thoughtful about what I wanted to get out of each role and each experience. Like I went in with a plan, a set of expectations, and I think that's always what drove me, through those different experiences. And so and one thing always led to another, which led to another, which led to another. And I think it's all gotten me to the role that I sit in today. And I think it's going, whether I consciously recognize it on a daily basis or not, but the role that I'm in now is also preparing me for what's coming next. And I think the things that I do today are a direct reflection of what's going to happen tomorrow.
That's amazing. And it seems like you were very clear in all the steps of the way. And I'm curious because clarity and making pivotal decisions that show that end up being successful decisions, I think it is an art and it is not something that we are born with, I think. So I'm wondering if we can go a little bit deeper in understanding how was the process of actually deciding, internal process, external process, if you had people that helped you there, because I think that for many women,
Yeah.
sometimes it is we are scared of making decisions, and it is not something that it is so natural, I would say. So it
Yeah.
seems like for you it is an acquired skill. So
Yes.
how did that happen? What happened inside of you and outside of you when those pivotal decisions were made?
That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that, but it's a story that I tell often that I think really dictated the trajectory. So I owe a lot of my, I think, internal drive and motivation to my mother. My mother
Mhm.
was very strategic when I was growing up to demonstrate and role model the success that she hoped that I would have. So I remember when I was 5 years old, she took me to her graduation for her master's program and her advanced certificate that she was doing. I was
Wow.
5 years old at the time. And I remember going to this. I remember what she wore. I remember her cap and gown. I have vivid pictures of this moment. I remember what I wore. And I just remember her saying to me, she said, Azrae, you're going to do this one day. This is going to be something you're going to do. And I think seeing that, the pomp and circumstance of the moment, seeing how proud my mother was of her accomplishment, I think that kind of lit a fire in me that has carried through all of my academic pursuits. So I knew I was going to go to college and I was going to get a degree. I knew I was going to go to get a master's degree because that was the kind of the path laid out. So much so I got two. I got two master's degrees now. I've gotten certifications. I've done all these things. And so I think my mother is really the catalyst that started the fire. But I think what what I think turned on my internal motivation is that I always felt, or I always had a personal drive. Like I wanted to be an expert, whatever it was that I did. I wanted to be a voice. I wanted to be an expert. I wanted to be a thought leader. Really, I know those words then, but I wanted to be a thought leader in what I was doing. And I think the internal motivation for me was driving towards success, driving towards achieving. Because I think that's kind of what my parents, and particularly my mother, expected of me. So once that engine kind of was fired up, I kept going. And so I think what you said initially about clarity, I do take on coaching clients on occasion. That my day-to-day life with my job and my family can be busy enough. I do experiences with, leaders. I always ask them, to think about like what it is that they truly want. Like, what is it that is going to bring them the most satisfaction, the most joy? Because I do think that once you have clarity of what it is you want and your expectations, it's much easier to make decisions in service of that, right? I think it's much easier for you to be planful and to make decisions and seek out relationships and seek out experiences and opportunities if you do understand on a much broader level what you're trying to accomplish and what you want to do.
And it is so true. And what is so powerful about your story, it seems like you had clarity. You saw a path because you had the role model of your mother, right? And so you could imagine your future. You had expectations from your mom and your father, I suppose, as well, right? So you were expected to become or to do something. And this is a pulling force, right?
Right.
At the same time. And so you were in a beautiful system that allowed you to make certain steps. And
Yeah.
now you say, when you do your coaching, you ask the clients, what do you want
Yeah.
to do or to be? Because clarity is important. And here I have a question, though, because when we ask somebody, what do you want?
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is a very difficult question
I
because
agree.
it is not. Sometimes we hear so often, if you could do whatever you wanted, everything is possible. What would you do? And what I want is not an easy question.
Mm-hmm.
How did you learn
Mm-hmm.
to? You said before that you followed your intuition,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was also another point I wanted to stress. And I think that being able to follow your intuition is very much linked to what then we want
Mm-hmm.
somehow. So I'm just wondering, if you look back now and if you had to teach me or people who are listening, here's it how you learn to want, how
Right.
you learn to become capable of wanting and following your intuition. What would
Yeah.
you say?
It's interesting. I'll leave the intuition secondary. I'll start with the want because I think the want is a little bit more straightforward, if I'm honest, because I think it's a practice over time for intuition. I have more to say about that, but I think in terms of want, like even when I ask that question, it's very rare to say for someone to say, I want exactly this job in this place doing this thing. Like that level of specificity usually doesn't exist. People know not necessarily what they want, but they might know what kinds of environments they like to be in. They know, how they want to feel. They know how they want to have an impact, right? There are certain what I would call broader themes and messages that people do that. So I usually try to distill it down a little bit deeper to say, well, what are the things that make you happy? Like what makes you smile, and I do a visualization exercise with people. I say, okay, close your eyes and I want you to think that you are someplace where you feel good, where you're happy and you're smiling. Describe it to me. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Are you in the mountains? Are you by the water? Is it sunny? Is it raining? The raining is very calming for a lot of people, like, trying to understand, because depends on people. First question they say, well, where do I want to plant my roots? Like I was from here, but I really have desires to be on the West Coast. I want to be in Florida. I want to be in Colorado. I love to ski, or things like that. It doesn't always so much about our lives is not necessarily, especially not anymore, surrounded by our 9 to 5s. Like there's much broader context, I guess, in which we live. So you start by just talking about what does it feel like, and then so when you're talking about what is your interaction with people, are you alone? Are you with others? Are you enjoying? Are you playing with others? Are you on teams? Are you moving towards a goal? Are you sitting quietly? Are you reading? Just trying to help people to start to better understand themselves and how they tick, which then to me leads to the intuition. I think, and this is just my personal perspective, I think that internally, if we sit in quiet moments and we reflect and we ask ourselves honest questions about how we're feeling, like just listening to our breathing, listening to our bodies, listening to the messages that run in our minds, right? We can build a level of awareness about kind of the intuition. Like we know when something feels good, we know when something feels right, when something feels comfortable, something feels not so good. And I think that's a practice of actually learning to listen to yourself, to have quiet moments, to close your eyes, to just take a stop, to just stop the world around you, and just really assess head to toe how you're feeling, what you're thinking, and what that looks like. And I think there internally is an inner voice, is an inner person, an inner part of you that will speak to you about what it is that you want to do, what it is that you want, how you want your life to be. But I think if you don't currently have that connection to yourself, you have to build that connection.
I
And I
love
think
that.
taking this time to do that, I think will start to open up that door to not only hearing your intuition and feeling intuition, but being able to follow it, which I think is really helpful.
That's so powerful. And I think, allow me to repeat that.
Yes, please.
In order to be free to want, we need to practice connecting to ourselves and learn again to feel ourselves and sense ourselves from the inside out. Because without that connection, it becomes very difficult to want. So that is so powerful, and
Mhm.
and you did it very well. And thank you for sharing these lessons. I have another question, Azure. You are an expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion, clearly, given also the role you are in. And if you again look back at your amazing path, what would you say have been key challenges that you had to overcome as a woman, perhaps as a woman of color? What have been key challenges? How did you overcome them? What are the lessons that you learned there, and perhaps you use them for your positions in your path?
Yeah. It's interesting. I was reading an article more recently, and it was talking about stop telling women that they suffer from imposter syndrome, right? And there was another article previous to that that was done by Mindy Calling, who was on The Office and rose to fame on that show. And she talked about experiencing imposter syndrome. And it was interesting because what I learned in that moment was not so much that I was suffering from imposter syndrome, but that was I was starting to internalize messages
Mm,
about myself and about my career path and my trajectory that I was getting externally that made me doubt and question what I was capable of, right? So when I think one of the first challenges, when I think about when I was younger, I think it was believing in myself, believing that I was smart enough, that I was capable enough, that I deserved to be in the rooms that I sat in, right? And if I'm 100% honest, it is something that I became more comfortable and confident about over time. When I think about the experiences of my 20s and starting my career, being very aware that I was, very often the youngest woman in the room, in the rooms that I was in. I was typically the only person of color, the only Black person, the only Black woman. And I think it's lonely. And I think you as a human being are always looking for connection with others wherever you are, whatever space. Like you meet somebody new, you talk to each other, you're looking for commonalities that you have, right? When there are so many visible aspects of who you are as a person that you don't have connections with others, it makes it difficult, right? So I think it earlier on it was the imposter syndrome, just believing that I belonged in the spaces I was in. And then once I was in those spaces, how did I get comfortable with being the only one, or that sense of isolation and loneliness? I think that can come from being just different, slightly different from the people that you're surrounded by. And I think, to be honest, I think ever so often I still think about imposter syndrome. Maybe not so much for myself in terms of, but I see it reflected in my mentees. I mentor a lot of young women, and I think it's important because one of the things I think that helped me overcome that was having mentors and having people
Mm,
that pushed me, that were invested in me, that wanted to devote their time, their attentions, their talents in making me a better leader, a better person. And I think a lot of that, those relationships absolutely helped me deal with the first two issues, being imposter syndrome and the isolation. I think the truth of the matter is that I think when you are a woman and you work in the private sector in corporate America, you are going to be few and far between. You're going to experience times where you're going to be uncomfortable, right? And I think the other challenge with that is being okay with being uncomfortable, right? I think that's a really big um hurdle for many of us to overcome, because we don't want to be uncomfortable. We want to be
mm,
comfortable. We want things to be
mm,
harmonious.
mm,
We want things to be smooth. We want things to just be easy and feel good. I think
mm,
there is a part of me and a part of us as women that we need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because I
mm.
think that's where growth lies. It's
Yeah.
in that moment of discomfort that you stretch yourself and that you grow. And then
Mm,
as you do that consistently over time, you build your confidence. You become more comfortable in the uncomfortable.
mm,
And you stop questioning and stop doubting, and you're able to release yourself from the limits that either you or others have imposed on you. And so I just
mm,
think those are, I would say honestly, those are the probably the biggest challenges that I've experienced. And I would say the last one, I say the one I'm currently facing now, and I think it has a tension between my work and my personal life, right? Is this whole idea of work life balance, work life integration. Like, how can women have it all? The proverbial question: if you are married, if you have children, if you want to have a career, how do you continue to balance your life in a meaningful way that allows you to have it all? Is it possible?
mm,
Can you do it? Right. And so I
mm.
think that challenge is something I am currently thinking about and currently working on, that I think I'm also making progress on that as well.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask a little bit to dig a little bit deeper in what you have
Yeah.
just said. So I asked you about the challenges, and you mentioned the imposter syndrome. You mentioned the feeling of loneliness and isolation because I am different in the room. You
Yeah.
mentioned being okay with being uncomfortable, and how do I do that? And then the balance between my personal and work life. So if we look at the imposter syndrome, feeling lonely and being okay with being uncomfortable, what did you actually do to begin to overcome that? And again, I'm asking about an inner journey, because that's what the one we do with ourselves. So when you are in that room, you are the only woman, you're only woman of color, you are sitting there, you maybe are experiencing speaking up, saying, being a voice and not being listened to, or I don't know what it was. but you feel lonely, you feel
Yeah.
isolated. What happens inside of you that tells you, let's move on one step forward? What was that experience like?
I think for me, I think there's so much in the messages that we tell ourselves, right? Like, I'm a big believer in affirmations and the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, right? So, preparing to go into a meeting or preparing to go into a space where I think isolation or imposter syndrome or uncomfort is going to, or just discomfort is going to happen, I take that moment to take deep breaths, to calm, to center myself. Like, I wish I was better and more frequent at doing meditation and breathing exercises and doing that, 'cause I think there's a lot there about how your body responds to your environments, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to do it more, but usually if I know that I'm stepping into a situation, right, where I think I'm going to have any of those challenges and those feelings, I start by taking deep breaths. I start by centering myself. I want to, if I'm not feeling calm at that moment, I want to become calm, because when I'm calm, I know I think clearer. And by default, I just feel better. I feel more grounded, right? So the first thing is breathing and just taking a moment just to center yourself and get grounded, right? Then I think it's the recordings, the affirmations, the messages, the stories I tell myself. I'll remind myself, like, Azare, in this particular topic, you have the experience. You know what you're doing. You know what you're going to say is going to add value, because no one else has your experience. No one else has done the things that you have done. And a lot of times I just need that reminder to say that I don't need to necessarily be like everyone else in the room. It's more important for me to be myself and for me to bring that to the room, because that's what people are looking for and that's what people are interested in. I think the other reminder I'll tell myself is that, and this to be fair, I think comes with age. I think as you get older, you become less and less concerned about how people judge you, right? You're always concerned with how are people perceiving me, how are people interacting with me, and how are they experiencing me, right? And I think over time, as you become more comfortable in your own skin, you become less concerned with how others perceive you, right? So I always tell myself is that your judgment of yourself is the only one that matters, right? The opinions of others about you and who you are not your business. That is for them to know. That is not for you to know. So I remind myself that as long as I feel good and I know that I have brought myself to the conversation and I have found a way to share my experience in that conversation, then I've done my job. I've done what I needed to do, right? And so those are the stories that I think I tell myself to remind myself that it's okay, and that the reason I'm here is because I whatever it is about me as a person is what I need to bring and nothing else.
This is so powerful, also because from what you're saying, and allow me to say it in a different ways,
Yeah.
perhaps. I understand that your lessons and what you suggest is get to know yourself, acknowledge really who you are, where you start and where you end, and what's possible for you beyond those biases and those judgments and those stories that cultures,
Yeah.
time has imposed on us. And once we distinguish ourselves from those, then we can start to feel and sense. And then instead of reacting, learning to stay in that room where I feel like,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm different. And so what? Right. So it seems this is that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing
Yeah,
this experience. And I have a couple of more questions,
please.
Azure.
Oh,
I love
yes, I love it.
you mentioned before that you had great mentors and role models apart from your mother, right? And
Mhm,
people that devoted their time to you and wanted to
mhm.
help in your career.
Yes.
Not everybody is lucky to have these people, right? They might be feeling isolated and lonely in
Mhm.
their path and in their career. So, did you actually and actively look for mentors and role models? So, did they just happen to be in your life.
Mhm.
Would you say that maybe it was the way, your attitude, the way you related to people that invited mentors? So what would be your advice according to your experience with respect to this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've done both, if I'm honest, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I was taught at a very early age when I was starting doing my internships that building relationships was a skill and something that was going to serve me well over time, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so for a very long time, I put a lot of effort and emphasis and proactivity around building relationships with others, connecting with people, so much so that it became comfortable. It became something that people describe. One of the top five things they describe about me now. It's like, oh, Azrae, she's very well networked. She knows a lot of people, but she goes in knowing no one. She comes out with 15 new friends, right? And so I think I learned early on that, the old phrase, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go with others, right? And so I just realized that no one is meant to do this thing called life alone, right? And so you need to have partners, you need to have support. And it's I think it's important for you to seek out those relationships in a very genuine way. I think people, generally speaking, can sniff out inauthentic behavior, right? Where you only want something from someone. But when you are genuinely curious, when you are genuinely interested in the lives and careers of others and the decisions that they made and how they got to where they are, people are almost always, in my experience, very open to having that conversation with you, for sharing that advice, sharing that wisdom that they've gained. And that time and effort is is incredible, and it will surely benefit you. And I think after doing that, you if there's a connection between you and the people that you have a chance to talk with, and you can build a more formal, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
mentoring,
Mm-hmm.
relationship where this person is aspirational for you, someone you want to be in some way, shape, or form. And so I have done both. I think personally, I just believe in being proactive, and if you can't tell, I'm a bit of an extrovert, if I'm honest. But I think even for those of us who are more introverted, who don't like to meet, like networking is like hell for them. Like that's the place they absolutely, please don't make me talk to these people. I encourage people to shift their mindset and think of it differently. Think about getting to know someone, being genuinely curious about someone, about their lives, even the conversation we're having today. Like I am thoroughly enjoying this conversation because I can tell that you are genuinely curious around my life, the decisions I've made, and how I've gotten to where I am. And I think most people, most human beings want to share that information and share that knowledge. And so even if you just pick one person that you think is just amazing and incredible, and you just want to learn from them and build connections, and you do that over time as it becomes more comfortable. And then if I'm honest, I think there are other people that saw things in me that I didn't see in myself at the time, right? I think they were convinced about my skills and abilities and my potential trajectory, so much so that they wanted to help support me. They wanted to help me get there, and they would volunteer their time and their insights for me without me necessarily seeking it out. And I know that that is particularly special and probably more rare, but that can happen if you put yourself in situations that people can see you, and that you can share really parts of your authentic self with others, so that they get to know you and they see something in you that they want to engage with.
And on the other side, exactly, for people that are not so extroverted, on
Mhm.
top of all that you have already shared, what would you recommend for people that experience rejection? Because sometimes we make an effort, we are outgoing, we overcome our fear, we make a step, and then somebody slap a
Yes.
door in front of us. So
Yeah,
how did you? I'm sure it happened to you too, even if you are an
absolutely.
extroverted and talented woman. Right? So how would you say is the best way to deal with rejection and failure? Because that's a tiny little failure, the way we
Yeah.
express it. What would
It's
you say is the best way?
it's so interesting. Like I will say I have prided myself on being prepared, on being very, very planful. So much so that I will say that I've rarely experienced rejection. So much so that I remember all the times that I have, right? And I think what you have to accept about life is that you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. You're not going to connect with everyone, and that's just a part of life. I think at a baseline, you just have to accept that
Mm,
rejection is a part of life. Like you can't go through life with a fear of rejection because that will limit you from
mm,
experiences, and that's the last thing I think any of us want to do, right? So I think first first step is just to accept it's going to happen, right?
mm,
But I think secondarily is when it does happen, right? The first thing I tell myself is, well, that's good because now I'm being steered in a different direction. Like I take rejection as a not this door and not this path, and maybe it's not now, maybe it's not ever, but timing, this path, this route, not right now. Try something else. I think of rejection as a try something else.
beautiful.
And I think if you look at rejection as testing something, you think of it as a test, like, okay, let me see how this works for me. Let me see if this feels good. Let me see if this makes sense. And then if it doesn't, you've learned, right, that this is something that you shouldn't pursue at this time, right? Or at this moment or with this person. And
Mm,
I think that goes for whether it's your career. I think it goes for personal relationships. I
mm,
think it goes for every aspect of your life that you have to um be comfortable and expect that there
mm,
will be rejection, and just to know that it's not so much a personal affront or attack on you. It's more so about whether or not this is the right place, person, time, thing
mm.
for you. And think of it more as a test and learn situation versus it being the end all be all.
And it is so positive actually and inspiring this because it is as if we have an insight into the future really through rejection, right?
Yes,
So it becomes we all want to know our future, and if we start looking at rejections and failure
yes.
as insight into the future, that becomes interesting and inspiring.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
And
Thank you.
the thing that you said just now about failure, I think it's funny. I think about early in my career, I was so scared about potentially failing because to me, failure was like the worst thing that I could ever experience, right? Until someone somewhere along the lines told me, well, if you're not failing, are you actually trying? Right? And I
Mm,
said, that is so profound because what was I not seeking for fear that failure was on the other side? And I
mm,
just learned that you miss out on a lot of things if you don't give it a try, knowing that you could fail. And guess what? Failure is okay. Failure is information. Failure is directional. Failure is even like failure in and of itself. I think can be a loaded word, but it just basically means that this didn't work, and that's okay. And I think
yeah.
also as my scientific mind, you think about there was the old joke about, Thomas Edison knew 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb, right? You
Mhm,
think about
mhm.
it. He finally eventually succeeded, but trying different things to kind of get there. But he had to go through all of those failures in order to make it work. So I think generally speaking, just as people and as humans, like we don't like the potential to fail. But I think if we shift our thinking about what failure actually means, I think we'll be much more comfortable taking
Mm,
risks, taking calculated risks,
mm,
educated risks, uh,
mm.
to try out things. And because you never know, if you succeed, how great would it be for you to do so?
Absolutely. So true. So true. Let me steer a little bit our conversation. Um, we have heard so many times the different experience that men in their path to leadership and women have.
Mhm,
Beyond the usual statements, beyond the usual biases that we know of and that we keep hearing,
mhm,
I would like to tap into what is not said or at least not brought up to the
mhm,
surface. So, if you could, given your amazing experience and your talent in many things, in many areas, if you could speak, and maybe you do, freely with male colleagues who are leaders, and you could tell and suggest actually to them to do something differently or to start doing something that they are not doing or to stop doing something in order for a collaborative leadership to emerge, what would you say beyond the usual?
mhm.
What could you tell them that maybe they don't see or you think they don't?
Yeah, it's so interesting, and only because it's top of mind. I have been posting a number of articles about the future of leadership, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It is grounded, in my opinion, in a level of authenticity that
Mm-hmm.
I think leaders are learning to adopt and be vulnerable and actually demonstrate more of who they are, right? And I think for men as well, there's a lot of stereotypes and bias around how men need to show up specifically in the workplace. And I think vulnerability and empathy are also just two places where you tend to see men not really lean into that side of their leadership, right? So I usually, when I'm coaching my male leaders, I'll tend to talk about how they lead authentically, like present more of themselves in their leadership, but also to demonstrate a level of empathy for their leaders and their managers. Because I think empathy, or rather emotional, like tapping into those emotions, I think is powerful. I think on the other side for women, I think we tend to be just more in touch with our emotions and our feelings, and being able to connect with people is part of how women have been socialized and are focused to do. But I think for men on the other side, that's not what they're doing. But I think in order for them to really reach their leadership potential, that is where they really should be focusing. Like, I tell women more often than not that they are holding themselves back. Like, when the old adage about when women are going for opportunities, they'll only apply for a job if they have 85 to 90% of the qualifications, where men, they'll say, I have 30%, I can do these two of 10 bullets, and I'm going to apply for this job, I'm going to post for this job. And it's more so just how we perceive our leadership and our abilities and our skills. But I think the difference that you see between men and women really is that emotional intelligence, that empathetic leadership, that I tend to have to encourage my male leaders to really lean into, even more than they probably do today.
I believe strongly that the future of leadership is collaborative, right? So on one side, what you have just said, so men get more comfortable being uncomfortable, being vulnerable, and feeling their emotions and
Mhm.
and expanding on their emotional intelligence. On the other side, and I would like to hear your opinion on that, would it also mean though that we women, we need to become aware of those biases that we do have in relation to men and their roles, and so it is also our own responsibility,
Mhm.
right? Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yes, I would. it's interesting because I think leadership and how you show up is a very personal decision. I think it's personal, and it's driven so much by who you are, right? When you start learning about all of the different leadership frameworks, whether you're situational leadership, whether you follow a more collaborative style, if you're more directive or authoritative or empathetic, all the different kind of forms and fashion, I think it absolutely is up to us as individuals for how we show up, right?
Yeah.
I also, one of my personal beliefs, honestly, is that I think that we as individuals have an ability to flex our leadership style, right? We can flex to the moment. There's a range, right, of which we feel comfortable and it feels natural to us, right? I think I think if there is a requirement of leadership that is outside of our comfort zone, I think we may or may not be able to get there, right? Because it just may be outside of who we are intrinsically as people. But I think it's our responsibility as leaders to be able to really dictate that adaptability and that flexibility and being able to move across a leadership spectrum as the people that we're leading need it, as the
Mm,
situation calls for. But I
mm,
think it is a very personal decision. I think that we are responsible
mm,
for how we show up as leaders, and there's always opportunities to learn. There's always a nature versus nurture conversation about leaders. Are they born? Are we born leaders? Are we groomed to be leaders? And I think honestly it's both, but I think kind of where you start, your personality and who you are as a person is kind of your starting point. But there's obviously room for flexibility and for growth
mm.
and for learning over time. And I think that that's really where we make decisions about how we show up.
Powerful, powerful. My last question is, Ray, you have a 7-year-old son,
I
right?
do.
What would be the one piece of advice you would give him so that he can become a man, a leader, a person that is successful and fulfilled
Oh,
in life and in his career? And if you had a daughter, what
yeah.
would you tell her?
Oh my gosh. I
One piece of advice only.
Yes, I know one is so hard. You know, it's interesting. My son, from a very young age, has always demonstrated a very high level of empathy. He was always in tune to people's feelings and emotions. He would, when he would talk with his teachers, he could tell if his teachers weren't having a great day. He would notice if they changed something about themselves. Like he was very connected, right? Very connected to his teachers. What I would tell him, the advice I would give him is that he he needs to try everything. I think kids at this young age, they like to stick to the things they know. Like we've given my son a routine. He likes his routine. He follows it. There's no surprises. Like that's okay. I think for him, what I would encourage him to do is to be open to trying a lot of new things. That there's more than one way to get something accomplished, and it's important for him to explore and try those things, and because he'll be much better for it, right? So that's probably the one piece of advice I would give him specifically. And then if I have a daughter, which I do hope to have, I think as a young girl, I think what I would tell her is to not be afraid to follow her passion. I think one of the things that I did in my career was to, wherever my interest lied, wherever I thought I wanted to go, I followed it, which is why I've had several careers. So I would just encourage her to follow her passion, follow what brings her joy, follow what makes her happy. And I think by default she's going to be successful. So that's what I would probably tell them
Amazing.
respectfully. Yeah.
Excellent. Azure, that has been wonderful. Thank you so, so much for sharing this story and your wisdom and your experience with us. And I'm sure you have inspired many women and men actually to move on their path and on their career. It's been really, really beautiful. So thank you so much.
Thank you so
Really.
much for having me. This was amazing. You've given me things to think about as I go through my day and my week, and definitely some reflections, and I love conversations like this. And I just want to say thank you for inviting me. Thank you for listening. It's been amazing.
My pleasure and honor. And Azura, if somebody want to follow you or be in contact with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm one of the very few Azares on LinkedIn. So if you type in my first name, I guarantee you I'll be one of the first five results. But I would love for you to follow me on LinkedIn and let's connect. I'm also on Instagram as well, so you can find me. It's my first name dot my last name on Instagram. So it's Azare dot Montoute-Lewis.
Beautiful. Thank you very much again, and hopefully we'll be having a conversation again.
Yes, I hope so. This was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Azura. Thank you, everybody.